Welcome everyone to today's social system mapping sense-making session for February 5th, 2024. This is a session that I usually do, and today Amy and Curtis are going to do it. This will be their first time. We are trying to transition from how we configure some of these kinds of sessions, and so this is going to be the first time they do this and the first time I'm not doing it. I usually do it with a colleague, either by myself or with Lisa Nigstead. And so, as I'm saying, this is a new thing for all three of us. And we have a strong value in this network of learning out loud and of managing transparently. And so Amy and Curtis have invited me to step in if I sense that things are going in a direction that isn't maximizing our time together. So I might interrupt, or I might interject something into the process as we go forward. And I'm going to invite you to experience that as me supporting them as opposed to fixing them or shaming them. And so I'm really excited to have this opportunity to help others step into this kind of teaching and doing this kind of a little bit of in real time coaching isn't something that I have a lot of practice in. And so I'm feeling just a little bit anxious about it. So I just want you to know that if I seem a little weird or tense at any time, especially if I'm stepping in, that's my own discomfort with myself, and it's not about anything anyone else is doing. I just want to make that transparent so that you all kind of have a sense of what's going on. And with that, I'm going to stop talking and hand it over to, I don't know which of you, Amy or Curtis, is going to take the next step, but
I'm first, Christine, and I'll be going up until the end of the explainer.
Okay. So do you want to say anything before I start sharing my screen, or do you want me to just go ahead and start sharing my screen?
I just want to suggest that probably my level of nervousness is higher than yours.
So everybody will be having to hold a little bit of anxiety for all of us. and there may be a little bit of impact on everybody because of that, but I just appreciate everyone's patience and willingness.
I will say though that more than nervousness, I am just super excited about the content, and so that will probably take over as soon as I start talking.
Cool. And I am sharing my screen, and you can. Okay.
All right. Well, let's jump to the next screen. So, welcome everybody to SenseMaking, February 5th. Christine, you want to, I think we're getting feedback somehow. Okay, so let's talk real quick about what this is. I'm going to be working really hard to be efficient with my words. There are some of you on this call who know me, Justin, and realize that that's probably going to be the hardest thing that I do today. But let's talk real quick about what this is. This meeting that happens the first Monday of every month. It is a vision about a possibility, and the possibility and the vision are that social systems mapping can play a significant role in moving systems from dominance, extraction, and exploitation towards systems of connection, reverence, and regeneration. It's also a learning opportunity. Every time we do this, we go over some of the basic stuff, and then we also go over some different theories and practice and stuff like that. And it's an opportunity in the midst of that learning to contribute your own experience, your own insight, perspectives, and things like that. And it is also a community of practice. There are usually almost always people on this call who come very frequently and are part of a larger community that's doing social systems mapping work all the time. Can you go to the next slide, Christine? And our objectives today, there are 4 primary things that we're trying to accomplish. One, that you gain a sense of the potential that is inspiring those of us who are doing this work regularly. 2, you meet some cool people. I will say I've seeded this particular call with some of my own cool people friends, and I know most of the rest of you here, and you are all cool, so it's going to be an easy one. We hope that you will be at least a little curious about how social systems mapping can support a network in learning how to deal with complexity. And you will see how we can use and explore different frameworks to understand their underlying fundamentals. And today we're going to be looking at some human systems dynamic stuff, CDE, which Amy will be talking about later in this call. So our agenda is some introductions and framing. We're in the middle of that right now. We'll look at just a high flyby overview of social systems mapping, just the basics. We'll do a 5-minute breakout where you can talk to each other for a little bit. We'll go through our theory of change that explains how the social systems mapping process can transform a system. And Amy is going to talk about CDE. We'll do another breakout, and then we'll end with review and reflect. So to get us started, we'd love to put you in smaller groups so you can have an opportunity to connect with each other. This is optional, so if you don't want to be in a group, you can put an X or an equal sign in front of your name. But when you get in your group, you are requested to just share your name, your pronouns, where you are at in the world geographically, and a little bit about whatever network you may be involved in or supporting or leading in some way. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Wait, back up. We're not going into groups. We're using a fancy tool called Mentimeter. I don't know how to explain to them how to get into Mentimeter. You're muted, Christine.
I was just realizing that, and I was thinking maybe you were jumping ahead and just skipping the Mentimeter step here.
No, just used to not using Mentimeter.
Yeah, well, I'm going to propose we skip it this time simply for the sake of time, and
Okay.
we'll put people in the. Okay, sorry, we're punting in the middle of the stream. Are you okay with that?
Yeah, you want to just skip the 3 Mentimeter questions and use those for the small groups?
Yep, that's what I'm saying.
Okay, that
Yep.
sounds great.
And
Right.
Kara, maybe you could put Kara, are you ready? Do you have them in the groups? Okay.
Let's wait and put them in the groups after. We'll just use the group time that we already had set up after I go through the basics of the social system mapping. And they can just add the name, pronoun, and location.
Okay.
Does that sound good?
I'm not sure what you mean, but go for it.
Okay, can you skip to the slide that said, the orange slide that says social systems mapping is?
Yep.
There you go. Okay, so we're going to talk just for a few minutes here about the basics of social systems mapping, which if you haven't engaged with it yet so far is just an absolutely phenomenally cool thing. And so if you jump to the next slide, you may have heard of different kinds of mapping in the past beyond, the paper ones or the ones on your phone. And social systems mapping includes a bunch of those potentially quite a few different kinds of mapping, including systems maps, stakeholder maps that talk about who has ownership, asset maps that reference different kinds of resources in systems, social network maps that talk about connections and influence, concept maps that illustrate ideas and all that kind of thing. Social systems mapping includes all of those things, which, as you can imagine, makes it much more complex a little more of offers a little bit more of a learning curve and opportunity to like hold all kinds of information that you can look at from different perspectives. In addition to that, it's important to understand that social systems mapping is not the thing that you end up with when you're all done. If you want to skip to the next slide. Social systems mapping actually starts happening before you put anything on a piece of paper or on a screen or anything like that. It starts with people coming together, and we'll get into that a little bit more in a moment. But it continues on all through the mapping process. And even after you have the first iteration of a map in place, the process of mapping is a key element of what social systems mapping is. So let's talk about the process itself and the differences between maps that are a product versus those that are a process. So social systems map, especially in the way that we do it, is online and interactive and accessible. Those three things are sort of all tied together. If we have started building a map with a group of people, most of the time, all of those people will have access to the map online, and they can participate in learning from and creating the map. In addition, on the next slide, it talks about the fact that social systems mapping is iterative, so it continues to grow, building on itself. It certain elements of the map, what it looks like, the information that it gives is emergent, because one of the things that it does is that social systems mapping process identifies patterns that start showing up in how people and information and all of the different parts of the map interact with each other. And we learn things that sort of pop out of that information. It's not fixed in time or space or in any sort of cognitive area. It's dynamic, so it's growing and changing as it goes, and it's ongoing, and it's a collective thing. So it's the result of multiple people and elements participating in the mapping process. The purpose of social systems mapping, if we can go to the next slide, is, as I mentioned earlier, to support a global movement which is intended to shift the systems that we see around us the way they are right now, which are usually marked by one group or a set of people being dominant over others, a lot of exploitation and extraction, taking from and manipulating rather than working together towards systems of connection, relational and all other ways, reverence for all people and things, and regenerative. So we're hoping and working quite hard, I might add, together and all over the place to use this mapping process to move systems in this direction. In order for that to happen, there's two primary things that need to be in place. The first thing is strong networks. And by strength, one of the main things that always pops into my mind when we talk about strength is it's not about it's not about the strength specifically or only about the strength of the individual people who are part of the network, but about their connections. So the strength actually shows up and blends together between people in those spaces. The network itself is what needs to be strong. And the network needs to be made of wise change agents. I think we have orange underlines or purple underlines in the next screen, don't we? Yeah, wise change agents. Looking at the screen, I already know that you are all wise in many ways. One of the things that we're looking for as we develop a social systems map in the process is that we go through a shift and become wise in new and generative ways as part of a strong network. Those two things they're non-dual. the strength of the network and the wisdom of the change agents are sort of inseparable and intermixed. They happen at the same time. In order for strong networks of wise change agents to emerge, we're looking for two fundamental shifts to happen. The first one is a relational shift. And note the orange, swathy, color crayon-y looking thing that's there. That's actually the result of quite a bit of work from our graphics team. I mean, it's not the whole graphic, but the orange is important. So a relational shift is a key factor in building strong networks. And then the second fundamental shift, we'll talk about that in a minute. So let's talk about the relational shift to start with. This little orange dot, fuzzy orange dot, represents the individual. And the way that we function primarily in our culture is as separate individuals. So this is representing this idea of like the singular entity and the wisdom contained within that person and their capacity to sort of handle everything on their own. Did you
Curtis?
give me a timeout sign? Go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to pause you.
Okay.
I am really loving how you are avoiding my jargon and using real words for real people. And that's wonderful, and I'm learning a lot from it. And I'm noticing that if we are going to get through everything, as you and I have joked about, this will take 4 hours, and that you're expanding in so many places. And it feels really useful for people who've never been introduced to this. So I'm not saying I don't want it to happen. And at the same time, I'm feeling a tension around getting to all the parts and getting to the CDE model. And so I'm just asking you to make a conscious decision about what it is that your depth of your expansion of all these little points, they're all huge points, but of these that I usually treat as very little, and I whiz right through them. So I'm not saying that's the appropriate approach either, but to note that we're every minute we're expanding, we're cutting back on something else, and most of that cutting back is going to be in where Amy was going to present. And so I'm just asking you to hold that tension and decide what to do about it consciously, because it's so easy for us to just see all the connections and what we're talking about and just keep going deeper and deeper and deeper. And at some point we have to zoom up a little bit. And so that's my request at the moment to you.
I hear you. I think I'm going to be shortening the last half of this part of the presentation. I was already planning on.
Okay.
I will admit, I think I've taken more time than I intended to on this part of it. Okay, so strap in, everybody. I'm going to go hyper speed. Okay, so we have the separate individual. The relational shift first begins with recognizing that you are not we are not separate individuals. There are other individuals, and importantly, that we're connected. We're enmeshed in a network already. This is something that already exists, like fungus and mycelium or brain cells in a brain. The second shift is the cognitive shift, the purple part. And that is the cognitive shift is from a mechanistic worldview where we see sort of hard edges and separate, simple ways of things interacting, moving towards more three-dimensional, more open, and sort of, more random, I guess I would say. And then actually flowing out into into everything. So everything is interacting in complex ways because they're alive versus being machines. So they're living complex systems. And those two things combine together. This little diagram is a really fantastic way of understanding the non-duality of the relational shift and the cognitive shift. And it's based on which they're always there all at the same time. Many of us tend to think of things more mechanistically. Others of us tend to think of things more relationally. It's just depending on the perspective that you take. And if we miss one or the other, then we're not getting the whole picture as we're trying to understand the complexity of the system, where the patterns arise, and how we can engage with it.
Curtis,
So,
Curtis, can I just, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm starting to guess where when to move the slides forward, and it would help me if you would say next slide, next slide, next slide, because it's a little bit different than what I'm used to. And I want to just quickly make a comment. Just this is a separate thing, but Susan, I'm noticing that you put a question in the chat. And I want to just acknowledge that the question is there, and to say that Curtis and Amy probably won't be looking at the chat for one, because they're presenting, and I would have responded in the chat, except that I don't want to get off with Curtis, so I'm paying attention to Curtis's slides. And in the response to the question, I would like to acknowledge that you have a framework in mind that you're trying to compare this to, and my invitation to you would be to just pay attention to this framework that we're presenting today and ask yourself what's the same and what's different at the end of it, because we don't necessarily know what the framework is that you're referring to. And that's not the focus of today's session, is to separate those. So great. I see your thumbs up. Thank you a lot. Sorry, I'm getting anxious because I'm aware of my own taking up time. And so Curtis, back to you, but please tell me when to push forward. Thanks.
Next slide. I just love this one in the way that it graphically illustrates how we as interdependent human entities are blended in with the complex living system. We are part of it, and it is part of us. And that's why when we do social systems mapping, we're not just taking into account the individuals in the systems map. We're actually looking at the give and take that happens through us into the system itself, because it's a whole living organism at every single scale that we consider. Isn't that a cool picture? Okay, next slide, and this is the point where we would go into the breakouts. So the questions we're going to combine. Stop me if I overstep here, but I think what we're going to do is to combine, and maybe we have a couple extra minutes for this because we didn't do the Mentimeter in the beginning. And the questions would be your name, pronouns, where you're at, and what systems you might be working with. And then the question, what is the possibility that you are believing in for the system that you are participating in or supporting or leading? Does that make sense? Okay. All right. Welcome back, everybody. Can you see the screen with the purple slide that says Social System Mapping Theory of Transformation?
Not yet.
All right.
Now we can.
Okay, cool. All right. So hopefully that breakout was a great opportunity for inspiration and connection. We're going to talk just for a few minutes here about how doing the work, engaging in the process of social systems mapping transforms systems. So if you would go to the next screen, it starts with a group of people who may or may not know that they have some sort of idea about how a system should change. In my experience, two big areas. One is youth suicide prevention and anti-trafficking. And these people are ungathered at this point. And then in the next slide, it shows how they start to experience a sense of this shared energy, this desire to see things shift. That's the little circles around kind of bumping into each other, and it starts to coalesce into something. And then in the next slide, we see that a small group of them comes together basically saying, hey, let's do something about this. Let's see if we can't take this energy and this shared desire for systemic change and make a shift. And so they intentionally, if you can see by this little orange swath, build connection with each other. And then in the next slide, they recognize their need to include other people in that same, that are sharing in that energy, in that same relational shift. And so they start building little connections. And then in the next slide, they start recognizing through their interaction with the small group's interaction with the larger group that they need to understand more clearly what is going on, and look for data that informs how they might make this shift. And so this may be pre-mapping, but they start collecting information and looking for like clues as to how to best move the system to make the change that they want to make. And in the next slide, and one of the things that's critical about this is this small group at some point starts to recognize that the data, the information that they need is contained outside of themselves, and they start to put the information together. And oftentimes, the people who they are trying to lead or gather or coordinate with are not necessarily interested in the way that they're gathering data, but they're using that to sort of shape how they build the movement. And that's what these white arrows are demonstrating, sort of the output and input of data that they use to shift, so that they're shifting in ways that match what's going on.
Curtis?
And as, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't hear the piece about that this part at the top, the data, that this is actually a social system map. So this isn't the vision at the top. It isn't, I mean, we're gathering data through sumApp and visualizing it in a social system map. This isn't just data that's sitting in somebody's desk that they've gathered from somewhere. It's a map. And I didn't hear that transition from they're starting to gather some data into creating a map together. And I wanted to hear that.
Yeah. Well, yes. But sometimes, isn't it true, at least it has been in my experience, that there is a bunch of data in somebody's desk, and then we realize that if we started building a social systems map out of that data, it becomes more effective.
Right. That is true. And this particular graphic is about data going. This is at the point when we're putting data into the map. So we're starting to crowdsource the data.
Right.
The arrows say data goes from the people into the map, and then the map goes from the map to then everyone can access that data. So there's a transition in process that this graphic represents that is needs to be super explicit. And the reason it needs to be super explicit is because people come a lot thinking that, okay, I've got all this data, how do I map it? And it's like, you can do a lot of things with it. We do social system mapping here, and we're talking about a very specific process for data gathering and process for data, presenting the data, and that is social system mapping. And we're not here to do all the other things one could possibly do with their data. So I don't like to confuse people. So that's why I make that step super explicit.
All right. So the social system map becomes a critical element in understanding how the people in the system and all the other elements of the system relate to each other. And if I'm right, as these arrows start to sort of snug up to the rest of it starts being more representative, right? That's the idea. And then as you can see, as the relationships and the information and the social systems map becomes more and more accurate, those arrows get more snugged in, and you can start seeing over on the lower right side, there starts to become a cognitive shift. or we start understanding.
So Curtis,
what-
I'm not on the same slide as you.
Oh, I'm sorry. There we go.
Okay. And yeah, okay. I'm gonna shut up.
So the purple starts showing up, and as the cognitive shift is being uh, represented. And then in the next slide, we see more of that purple. So the purple and orange start to mix together and become sort of all one thing. And the arrows get more snugged up. The social systems map is more and more representative. There's more people, as you can see in the slide, there's more people that are going into this sort of infinity 8 thing. So more and more people are adding to and contributing to the mapping. And then ideally, when in the next slide, the data and the mapping information and the cognitive shift, the relational shift, all become enmeshed into one perfect representation that gives us everything we need to know. The system has been shifted. And Christine, you wanna sort of finish off that part?
Thanks. The one thing I was looking for was a little bit more about what makes what the orange circles are and what the purple, I mean, you referred to them, but like what makes them happen? It's not magic. It's actually people doing convening, people doing learning, people sense making with the map. And so that I wanted just a little bit more reference to the actual what pulls us together. And then the last piece is it's enmeshed, but it's aligned enmeshed. I mean, kind of the point of this whole figure 8 thing coming together is that it's getting more and more, like the data is rough at first and then it's getting more and more aligned. With the purpose, with the relationships, with the understanding. All of those things are lining up and starting to create a force that has a power of its own, like a vortex. So those were the pieces that I felt I wanted just a little bit more, just a touch more about. And I know that you were hurrying up, so and I appreciate what did come up. And I'm complete. Thank you for that.
Any thoughts, comments, questions, clarification from anybody else on the call?
I could ask, I think what Christine asked is how you get there. I'm always curious about, I'm in Minnesota, we're the land of 10,000 nonprofits in addition to 10,000 lakes. And, if you're doing anti-trafficking work like two of you are, how do you see the WISE network coming together in not having 10,000 groups doing it, but maybe getting to 10 groups that are doing it? I don't know if that's just like so far down the road, but that's just a question on my mind.
I mean, specifically, part of the way that we're doing it is convening, and we're looking at people who are doing work in the anti-trafficking realm. We're looking for people who are thinking with a sort of systems mindset, and they're already both subject matter experts and collaborative, and we try to get those people together, and that's exactly part of the work. And it's really difficult. It's a lot of work to gather those people together and get them thinking in the same direction, and partly using mapping is a significant part of how we're able to accomplish that. We hope to be able to accomplish that.
Thank you so much, Curtis.
Yeah.
I feel inclined to just add a touch to that, which is part of the theory of social system mapping, is that we can't see, if we're just doing things, we can't see who else is doing it. We can't see where the resources are flowing. There's a whole lot we can't see when you talk about a network, or as you're talking about in a way, a network of networks. There's so much that we can't see on the ground without some kind of tool to help us learn, gather the information and then visualize the information. And so the theory of social system mapping is that we're adding a supportive layer to what Curtis is talking about that helps us begin. And the purple swath is like a big focus for me, is it helps us begin to see outside of our own perspective and see the whole, the network of networks as a whole and as a system, so that we're able to begin to look at the system itself and understand ourselves as a part of a system. And that's the piece that social system mapping is designed and meant to help us do that we can't do in another way. So I just wanted to highlight, there's all this work. There's lots of convening work. There's lots of research work. There's lots of outreach work. There's lots of learning work. And a social system map is a way of pulling all that together into something that we can see from a very high level, as well as be able to dig down deep into the details to be able to zoom in and out of the system.
Thank you, Christine.
I'm complete, Curtis.
Me too. I think we're ready to transition to Amy.
Thank y'all. Good to see everybody. I'm going to guide us through our next part of our time together. I will say, just give you a heads up, we will be on till the 30th, depends on where you live in the world. It'll be 11:30 my time, but we'll have some time at the end where we'll just have some open conversation for those who want to stay. But if you need to hop off, please feel free to hop off, and we'll kind of let you know when we're done with the formal. And of course, if some of you need to hop off early, you do what you need to do. And yes, it will be recorded. I think Kara put that into the chat. So these first Monday sessions are supposed to be, and sort of the main thing, one of the main things we want to get to is sense making. And sense making has a lot to do with that purple shift that we saw as Curtis was explaining the map. And so in these Monday sessions, we want to spend a little time looking at some models and tools and methods that help a network, a social system, start to make those particularly purple shifts. And so when you think about sense making, think about applying a method for what are we seeing? What are we noticing? What are we discovering? What does it mean? Are we noticing where things are functioning well, or maybe where there's some things missing? And hopefully we're beginning to see what might be possible. So when we're sense making, we're bringing to our conscious mind things that we may not have noticed before. And as we're looking at the social system map, as Christine was saying, things become visible that hadn't been visible. So we're looking at them at different angles and saying, so what does this mean? And then what might we do next with this? And so in our sense making, we're often invited to say, what is one small nudge, one small tweak, one small little influence we might have on the social system to see how it delivers a change. Does it deliver a change? Is it a change that we wanted? And then we continue to sort of look at it and make sense at it. Next slide, please, Christine. So I pulled this quote from some work that Christine had done, and I thought, oh, this is really cool. This helps me understand sense making. This quote comes from Werner Heisenberg, who was a German physicist and Nobel laureate. And if you do know of him, you would know that he's made some significant contributions to quantum mechanics. But what we observe is not nature itself, but nature exposed to our method of questioning. And next slide, Christine. So I reworded this quote with a sense-making lens to say what we observe about our network is not the network itself, but the network exposed to our method of sense-making. Mm-hmm. So just a little bit of rewording. So a social system map gives us new insights into our network. And as we bring to our social system mapping and the network that it represents tools and methods of systems and complexity thinking, we are helped to gain even deeper insights into our networks. So these models and methods can help us get really curious and get curious about things we maybe never even thought to get curious about. So that's kind of my understanding of sense making. Next slide. So today, the rest of today, we want to look at just one model that we might bring to our sense-making efforts. This model is called CDE. You can see it stands for Container, Difference, and Exchange. And it comes to us from a body of work called Human System Dynamics. Human System Dynamics is a body of theory and practice that brings ideas from complexity science into practical application to help people deal with intractable issues. Next slide, please. A woman named Glenda Ouyang is the founding executive director of Human System Dynamics Institute, and Kara has put the link in the chat if you want to dig in a little bit better or a little bit deeper. But this, in a nutshell, is their theory of change. So you have on the right a complex adaptive system, a social system. Think of all of the slides that Curtis just walked us through. And then over on the right, we have some different methods and tools for spotting patterns within our social system. And then we're going to look at the CDE, this one model, but I also want to take just a minute to talk about the adaptive action cycle because it's sort of central to the way this theory of change works. And the idea is that we observe what is happening in our network. And I'm observing it, you're observing it, we're observing it together as a community. And then we're saying, okay, now that we sort of have this observation, what does it mean? So what? Like you're saying so what? I'm saying so what? And then together we're coming up with the now what? One small doable thing, one little nudge we might agree to try so that we go around this cycle again. So what happened? So what does this mean? And then now what we do again. So that adaptive action cycle, kind of keep that in mind as we talk a little bit more and go deeper into the CDE. The CDE, Container, Difference, and Exchange, is a way to get some new insight into what we are seeing. Will you go forward again, Christine? And if you didn't, Kara, I'm sorry, I'm not watching the chat, but I think I had if you have a link to the adaptive action cycle, feel free to put that in. And if you have one to the description of CDE, feel free to put that into the chat. So let's talk a bit about the C, the container. And again, bring a social system, bring your network to mind. And the container is a way for us to get explicit about what are the boundaries that hold this social system together. How does it get contained? How does it get bounded? And often these are the similarities that are happening among those that are bounded together. What do they have in common? It could be, we were talking about Curtis's work and the human trafficking. That's a type of goal that they have. They may have certain groups that they're working with. There are certain values that might be bounding this work together, perspectives, geography, where you're located. You mentioned Minnesota might be a container if that's where you are working. And then Christine often mentions individuals can be a container, and thinking about individuals that are very charismatic or very well known. So you might think of the influence that Barack Obama has to be a container, or that Donald Trump has to be a container. Would you do the next slide, Christine? So the next slide is from a previous session where we asked people to name some of the containers in their networks. And so I thought I would just give you a minute to look at some of these. projects can be a container. The other thing about containers is you can kind of go in and out. I can go really wide and say Minnesota's my container, or I can zoom in and say Minneapolis is my container, or I could zoom in even further and say the zip code is my container. So they can change depending on kind of the way that you're looking at it and what you want to focus in, or if you want to focus out. So we're going to use Mentimeter now, and someone will put a link into the chat. And so Mentimeter, this product lets us ask you a question and have you engage and give us your answer. So we're going to see what our own answers are to this question about containers. So if you'll use the link in your chat, and as you think about your network, how would you name some of the containers, some of the ways your network is bounded, some of the similarities that kind of hold your network, kind of keep it so that it's identifiable? Will you type in your responses?
I'm seeing the slides, not a place to type something in. I don't know if
Christine.
anybody else.
Did you click the link, Jim?
In the,
Yeah, I'm in Mentimeter and I'm looking at the slides.
Well, the slides are probably on top of the browser. So there's the,
Oh, I see it. I'm sorry. It's
So
old
anybody
guy
else-
stuff.
is anybody else having trouble getting into the Mentimeter input place where you can input your, if you're having,
Maybe there's a
Well, I got it.
keep flipping through your slides.
Brian, what were you saying?
I'm at the place where you share your name and pronouns. Is
Oh,
it behind that? You have to just
Okay.
keep on going?
you try clicking the next page because we skipped those ones because we didn't
Yeah, I
have,
know.
yeah.
All right.
Is it, are you able to go to?
Now
the-
I got it. What possibility do you envision the system you're engaged in? Okay, I got it now. All right,
And
thank
then
you.
No, After that,
one more. This
What
should
One
be
more?
what are some containers of your network? Is what we're,
Okay.
and then I heard someone, a voice saying something. Can you repeat? Are you still having trouble? Whoever that was?
Yeah, when I clicked on the link, I just get all your slides.
Can you, there should be at the lower part of the slide, something like move forward or something. Next slide, next slide.
Okay.
And then, is that working for you?
We're just having to skip through all the slides to get to the next submit.
You're looking for the slide. What are, it says numbers, the C, what are some containers of your network?
Yeah, we just have to skip through all the slides.
I'm asking the woman who was having trouble. Are you catching, are you,
Same as what he's saying. We just have to keep flipping through a bunch of slides to get there. So we're working on it.
yeah, okay. Okay. So, we'll do this more smoothly next time. And if anybody is, and there, I'm sharing the slide that all the information goes into. So if you're making, once you start putting in responses, they will show up in the shared screen of the Zoom dashboard. And you can come back and look at those. But I'm seeing that so far we don't have any responses coming in. So if anybody's there and wants to input responses, that would be great. So we can see if all of this is working okay.
Thank you.
We have a response.
Okay. So roles can be a container, I'm seeing.
Yep.
Anybody have any others? And hopefully y'all, this next question that I'm going to have you do will go quicker because you'll be in the right spot with the link.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Topics, social foundations, education, yeah, can be a container. Great. Yeah, wonderful. So the containers are typically, like I said, what we have in common, what's similar that's kind of bounding us together. Let's look quickly at differences. Will you go to the next screen, Christine? So differences are what they say. That's what is different about some of the elements in our social system, some of the elements in our network. It's what's distinct. As we look at the whole that's bounded, where do we see differences within the whole? And you see some examples here. We might have different interest. We might be bounded together by the same cause, but we have slightly different interest as we come to that cause. We had roles in the previous one that can be a container, but you'll see there's an example. Roles could also be a difference. It depends on kind of how you're looking at your particular network. So thinking about your network, we're going to talk about differences. Christine, do the next slide just for a few more examples. So again, this comes from when we asked this question from a previous group. I just want to give you a visual of a few more differences. Christine, is the next slide?
No, can I just toss out one thing that I think is really important to keep in mind about differences?
Yes.
That differences are in a larger, I mean, in any system, you've got your container, which holds a bunch of differences, and differences are really important to be aware of and to think about all the time, because differences are where the tension in a system comes from, and the tension is where the potential for change comes from. So if we're not really keeping an eye on our differences, we're going to miss opportunities, and we might miss challenges as well, and they might surprise us. Thanks for letting me insert that, Amy. And now I'm going to the next slide.
Yeah. So you may notice that some of the things that are listed here as differences could also be listed as containers, but it's more about your view and your network and how it is that you want to begin to make sense of it. So I mentioned geography might be a container, but here it could also be a difference where you are within the state of Minnesota, let's say. So it can be a difference. And the differences they are things, as Christine said, they are things that we want to watch. They are where there's a lot of potential for change and collaboration and the sharing of ideas. And so there are things that we do want to notice. So if you guys will use your link, you should come to a question that asks you to type in, what are some differences in your network? Super, y'all were quick on that one. Rural and urban. Yes, I have that going on in a network that I'm working with. The speed of change, bioregions, good. Punitive versus rehabilitative. Yeah, age. Okay, super. Great examples of differences. Let's get to the last one, because then I want to get y'all in small groups to talk. So the last one is an exchange. And so an exchange, when we think of it in the context of the CDE, this is what's the flow between the elements of your network. This is where things are moving, ideas, energy, resources, information, and flows can be different. So you've got some examples here of flow. Flow could be funding, it could be money, it could be swapping skills. I'm willing to share something that I have skill-wise with you. Maybe or maybe not, you will share it back with me, but we'll share with each other in this system. Connection and language. So let's look at the example from our previous, do the word cloud from our previous.
Go back. Is that what you're
No,
saying?
forward, please go forward. So here's some examples from another session that we did where people were asked to type in what kind of exchanges do they see in their network. So let's now, everybody, if you'll use the Mentimeter link, tell us what are some exchanges that are happening in the network that you're thinking of. Wonderful. Social perspectives, power. Great. All right, y'all. So your invitation, good research, wonderful. All right, so we are going to put you guys back into small groups. Kara, I think for the sake of time is maybe we'll try to keep it to about 6 minutes. And as much as possible, we'll put you back into the same groups, but I know several people had to leave at the top of the hour. And Christine, I think my next slide actually has some questions for consideration when they get into their small group. So share, if you haven't already, which maybe you did in your first group, but remind your people in your group, what's the network you've got in mind as you've been thinking about containers, differences, and exchanges, and share some that you are thinking about. Where are some C's, some D's, and E's in your network? And does looking at containers, differences, and exchanges offer you any new insights into your network? And if you were to think of one small nudge, one small adjustment you might make because of these new insights, maybe share with each other what that is. So we'll just have 6 minutes and then we'll come back and have some time to hear your questions and do some sharing in the large group. So Kara, when you're ready.
I have one facilitation question because of how people dropped off. I
Okay.
technically have 3 paired groups at the moment that I'm wondering if we might like to reassign people into groups of 3. Or if we just want to stick with the same groups, but it will be groups of 2.
I vote stick with what we've got for now.
Okay. Then
And 5.
I'm all set.
Well, how about we do 5?
Okay.
Thanks, Kara.
Yep. I think we've got everybody back now.
All right. Thank you, Kara. All right, y'all. Thank you for going off to small groups. Thank you for sharing. Why don't we take a few minutes just to open up turn your mics back on. And I would just love to hear, as you were in your small group using containers, differences, and exchanges, what new insights did you gain? Anybody?
I can jump in. It was super quick and we didn't even get to our third person really. So, but I think that no matter what issue you're working on, there is the challenge of, is there enough difference in the group that you're working with? So I mentioned it can be very difficult to get the sectors together, all of the sectors. So often the group that you're working with might seem like there's a lot of parties in it, but they all have similar thoughts. Like I'm with the business community primarily. So how to bring the really different thoughts from the various sectors in addition to all the voices from community.
Christina,
You're muted.
yeah, Christine.
Susan, I have a quick question for you, Susan. I think you're an HSD practitioner. Is that right? Or am I just
I aspire to be an HSD certified professional, but I am not.
Okay.
But I am a big fan.
Yeah, I've seen you around enough. We both are in Minnesota. I just wanted to double check. Thanks.
Absolutely.
Well, and as I'm looking at the screen, I don't know if Natalie and Cy are still with us, but Susan, in addition to you, I know, or seeing you, I see faces that I know have been through the CDE before. So I think what I'd like to do for the sake of time is maybe bring us to a close, but then for those of you that want to hang around and we can keep talking about this or other things, we'll stay until the bottom of the hour. But I want to, just before I let the rest of you go, is just share with you a couple of announcements coming up in our community. And if you don't know about these, you can mark your calendar, but next Monday, February 12th, we'll have our second Monday is always an on-ramp session. And Denise, who was on earlier, and Ben Roberts will share their map and talk about how they've been using it for the weaving lab. And Kara will get a link to you. I think she just put it in the chat. And then our third Mondays of the month are a deep dive. And Christine is going to be talking and Basil with the Western New York Health Foundation. And those are great opportunities just to go a little bit deeper into social system mapping. So next 2 Mondays. And then finally, Kara's going to put in the link to our community of practice map. And so if you haven't looked at that lately, click on that link and get to the map. If you aren't on the map, Kara will give you a link to actually opt in, and you can add yourself to the community of practice social system app. And if you haven't updated in a while and you don't have your link, you can use the link she is putting into the chat to get your link to update your information. We have recently added a new question that we'd love for you to take a look at. It is a question about our racial identity. And so it's a great time to go in and update your profile. So per the traditions of this community, we will wish everybody a great day. And then again, stay on until the bottom of the hour if you are so inclined, just for some open conversation. But if you will unmute yourselves, and what we will do is I will count down from 3 to 1. And when I get to 1, we will all say goodbye, wish well wishes to everyone for the day, and you are welcome to leave. All right, that's great, Natalie. 3, 2, 1.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Great
Wonderful
feature.
seeing
Have a
faces.
great day and the rest of the week.
Loved everyone.